call Denise Roach.
Here. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise to take a call on part 5, which I think a previous speaker said is fairly innocuously titled Other Matters, and there's quite a lot of other matters in here. The one I think that strikes me as quite interesting is the one around the regulations, sir. Now, the regulations start, I think, with section, starts quite a way back, and it covers an enormous amount, actually. But it starts with regulations in 221. But the one that I was wanting to focus on for the discussion that I want to add to this part of the proceedings is around the regulations that are specified under clause 224, regulations relating to worker engagement, participation and representation. And Ian Lees-Galloway has already talked about the whole issue of work groups. But I want to focus my attention, sir, on the page across from there, on page 122, which covers subpart 4A, which is the regulations around specifying high-risk sectors or industries for the purposes of sections 65(3)(b) and 86(a)(3)(b). Now, when you go back and have a look at it, what it means is that it's the regulations around the exemption of workplaces with fewer than 20 workers to have health and safety reps is what's covered in 65(3)(b), and what's covered in 86 is around the PCBU's exemptions to have a health and safety committee. And Sarah, and I think this is actually what we've been talking about in the last few days, well, since Wednesday, when the Minister released his idea of what he considers to be high-risk industries and industries that are low-risk. And so there has been an enormous amount of concern around the way some sectors have been determined to be at this stage called high-risk, and others have been deemed to be low-risk. And the low-risk ones there, which of course under these under the provisions in 86 and 65 would therefore be exempt from having health and safety reps or health and safety committees. And particularly, sir, around agriculture. Now, we know that agriculture is a dangerous industry, and we know this because of the number of deaths in industries. You just have to say quad bike and you immediately evoke all the accidents that have happened on farms with quad bikes over the last 5 years, and there have been heaps. And yet agriculture, places where they use quad bikes, dairy farming, cattle farming, sheep farming, are deemed to be low-risk industries. And you kind of got to think about how do these regulations get made? It does say, I guess, further on under clause 226 that there is to be consultation. However, the consultation in 226 just talks really about the Minister must not recommend on making any regulations under some of the previous sections without first consulting persons and organisations that the Minister considers appropriate, which sounds well and good. But actually, it goes on to say in clause 3, part 3 of that clause, that a failure to comply with this section doesn't actually affect the validity. And so you kind of query whether, and I would really like to hear from the Minister, who says that he is going to consult around the regulations, I guess, that will be determining what are high-risk industries and what are low-risk industries, but in the meantime has kind of skewed it a bit by saying we're using this criteria to determine it, and we've decided that worm farming is a high-risk industry, and we're determining that alpacas is a low-risk industry, and cattle farming is a low-risk industry, but butterfly breeding and catch breeding are all high-risk sectors. And it just, Mr Chair, Mr Chair, thank you, it just doesn't make sense. But I'll get back to that duty to consult, which is outlined in 226. When it talks about what the Minister will consult on, and even though he doesn't have to consult because it doesn't invalidate the regulations that will be made as a result, one of the things that it says that it will consult on is 221, clause 221, which talks about the welfare, I think. 221, it talks about the welfare of workers. And it's got quite a lot in it, actually, but it does actually, yeah, it's in 221, regulations relating to health and safety. But in 226, in the consultation, it also specifically says that it will, some of those things that it will consult on is around regulations around accommodation. Now, I went on a bit about accommodation for workers as part of their remuneration packages in a previous part that we were discussing last week. But I do note that the Minister doesn't have to consult about what is adequate housing for people, but there is the ability to have that regulated. It's kind of, this section sort of seems to me to be the yeah, nah section. The yeah, we'll do that, but nah, we don't have to. The yeah, we'll have health and safety reps in some industries, but not the ones that we think are low risk, despite the fact that everybody else thinks they're high risk. And we will consult if we feel like it, but it doesn't make it invalid, so it's a yeah, nah kind of situation. And it worries me that there are these kind of get out of jail clauses that are consistently through parts of the bill. So I don't think, well, I think that when we do look at regulations, there does have to be excellent consultation. And if we're looking at changing health and safety culture, then that consultation has to be widespread. It has to be with more than the employers. It has to be with more than just the industry peak bodies. And this is where workplace representatives or health and safety committees could have been really useful, particularly in the high risk categories, the ones that are actually high risk industries, because that's where you can get real consultation and the real solutions about what's happening on the job start to make part of the culture change on the workplace. So Sarah, a bit concerned about this whole thing about how you develop regulations and how you don't, and exactly what we will have in them, because those are the powers that are handed to the Minister. They're not necessarily in the body of this that we're discussing now. And that concerns me as well, because it seems to me that we should actually rely on a wider range of viewpoints to get to a place where we do create good workplace health and safety culture. I think that's all I'll contribute at the moment. Thanks.
So Sue Moroney.